Is there going to be an AI bubble burst? Yes or no?
Yes. There's no question that we're in a significant bubble.
If you've got a pension, if you've got savings, anywhere in the world, you will not be left standing if there is a reckoning in this market. Everyone keeps talking about the risks and the possibilities, but they keep piling in and buying.
When the retail investors are no longer willing to be at the end of this chain of people passing off the investment to one another, that's when the whole thing bursts. And who gets stuck for the bill? The answer is the mom and pops.
When is this crash that you predicted very confidently on this podcast gonna happen? And if anything can be done to stop it, what would that be? Hello and welcome to the Fourcast. Is the AI tech sector about to crash and burn, scorching the world economy as it implodes? A growing chorus of analysts say it is. So I thought I'd better quickly ask AI to write me an introduction to this episode while it still can. Here goes. In my voice, but not my words. Listen. Has the world's AI boom turned into a bubble? Even OpenAI's talismanic CEO Sam Altman admits that parts of the sector are kind of bubbly, and now economists, banks and investors are warning the crash could drag down the global economy. So, are we looking at the next dot-com bust or just the growing pains of a genuine technological revolution? Thanks, ChatGPT. You're welcome to my day job. Now, to discuss this, I'm joined from Silicon Valley by the entrepreneur, author and futurist, Jerry Kaplan. Perfect to have a futurist on the Fourcast. And from the World Bank Group annual meeting in Washington, our very own economics correspondent, Helia Ebrahimi. Jerry, first to you. Is there going to be an AI bubble burst? Yes or no?
Well, since I was just warned not to swear on camera, I'll just say yes.
Okay.
There's
Elaborate,
no
please. Elaborate.
There's no question that we're in a significant bubble. I've now been through, this will be my fourth major bubble. And they all have exactly the same structure. And I see all the same signs today that I've experienced in the previous four bubbles.
But this AI bubble, if indeed it is a bubble and it's going to burst, is it big? Is it ugly?
And my understanding is that if you look at the total numbers involved in this, it's quite a bit bigger than the last major bubble, which was very destructive, of course, which was the so-called dot-com or internet bubble. So I do think there's considerable danger. My understanding is that about 80% of the gains in the US stock market have been attributable to a very small handful of companies, all of which are big in AI. So I think that speaks to a lot of risk, both in the stock market and the collateral damage that would occur in the wider economy. We're in a financially precarious position. I fully expect that this bubble is going to burst at some point. And when it does, it's going to have some very negative effects. It's actually having negative effects now. The problem is that they're masked by the appearance of so much activity in deal making and capital flowing around.
So that's a pretty dim view. Let's go to Helia at the IMF in Washington, D.C. I mean, Helia, one of the reasons why we're doing this podcast, this forecast today on the AI bubble bursting, if it's going to burst, is because the IMF has been warning about it, although it's not been using any F words or anything nearly as dramatic the language that Jerry has used.
Not quite as colourful as Jerry's
Not quite as colourful, but what are they saying and why are they saying it?
Listen, everyone is talking about this. It's policymakers, it's politicians, it's bankers, it's investors. Everybody's worried because the valuations we're talking about are massive. Nvidia, the chip maker, is now bigger than the UK economy by a stretch. This is not just a little bit bigger, but almost 20% bigger than the whole of the UK economy. The valuations of these companies are huge. And so if you own a ISA in the UK, if you've got a pension, if you've got savings, anywhere in the world, you will not be left standing if there is a reckoning in this market. So the question is, you ask, is this a bubble? And I think there's two ways of answering that. In the IMF, they were talking about, the chief economist was talking about similarities with the dot-com bubble. And if you look at that, there's two perspectives. One is on a valuation perspective, and yes, there are similarities, but I have to say, the valuations are still far away from what we saw in the dot-com bubble. And for viewers at home, that was another era in which the World Wide Web had been created. There was lots of Alan Greenspan, the former chair of the Federal Reserve, called it irrational exuberance, where the market was so excited by the possibilities of the World Wide Web that they just thought, oh my God, these companies are going to make more and more profits, and we're going to give them the kind of valuations that have nothing to do with the money they're making right now. And then when it burst, it all kind of crashed down.
So are you saying that, just remind me, the valuations in the dot-com era, when that crashed, or just before the crash, were much higher than now?
Yahoo, Cisco, they were talking about 100 times forward earnings. It makes kind of Nvidia's 29 times, 30 times, 26 earnings look sort of modest, sort of sensible. Now that doesn't mean that there isn't going to be some kind of reckoning with AI stocks, because the kind of money and capital you're seeing invested, and as you said, everyone is talking about it now. Jamie Dimon, the boss of JP Morgan, was talking about it. The Bank of England warned about the asset prices and how frothy it is. But I just want to make clear that both from the regulator perspective and what we were hearing out of the IMF, yes, it's similar to the dot-com bubble, but they're talking about it not having systemic risk, like, for example, the financial crisis.
And why is that?
Well, because it's not in lending. You know, that's the Jeff Bezos line. Now, obviously, these people all have skin in the game and they want to talk up their companies. But his point is that, yes, there's a lot of froth in the market because there's a lot of potential and lots of possibility. And even if that bubble burst, there's something happening underneath that is useful, innovation, invention, that is useful for society. I mean, like, if you invested in Amazon in 1999, you were at the peak, but you were before the dot-com bubble burst. If you invested $1,000, and like you, I went to DeepSeek and ChatGPT to get my calculation, you would now be sitting, even adjusted for inflation, on $33,000. So even though Amazon lost 90% of its stock market value, they were one of the winners. And a couple of weeks ago, I was interviewing the Nvidia boss, Jensen Huang, and he was, they had the same vibe, basically, that there will be losers, there will be people who fall at the edges, but there will be winners in this, and backing those winners and making sure they can build out this, you know, if we build it, they will come. Data, you know, countries and countries of GPUs is going to have a huge impact on the society.
Jerry, let me bring you in again. I mean, you experienced the dot-com crash, and you've been working in tech in Silicon Valley for decades, if I may. So you know what you're talking about, and you know what these things look like. Tell me, intrinsically, is there anything more valuable in AI than there was in .com? Or are they both, do they both have the same ability to change our society, to come up with new products, but the valuations are just different?
Well, I want to make sure we can keep two seemingly contrary things in mind at the same time. The new wave of AI is a wonderful step forward in the future of automation. It's another major advance, and it's going to have very broad societal effects. The same thing was true about the internet back in 98, 99, when my company, On Sale, I've got a sign behind me, we went public. We had a multi-billion-dollar valuation at one point. Now, your colleague is talking about, well, if you'd invested in Amazon and you just held it, you would have been fine. Here's the problem. There were dozens of other companies that looked just as good. Take that same $1,000 and put it into Yahoo. Where would you be today? The point is that you can't pick the winners. You don't know who the winners are going to be. People sometimes ask me, well, who are going to be the winners in this? Is it going to be OpenAI? Is it going to be NVIDIA? And my answer is, I think the winners are going to be Yahoo and Netscape. So with that in mind, that you can't pick those winners, and so many companies are going to waste or lose all of the invested capital that have been put in. Hundreds of billions of dollars we're talking about. That's going to be a problem. Let me take you back to 1999, if I can go on for one more second on this. One of the major areas of investment that happened at that time, the internet, everybody knew that was going to be great, and it was absolutely true. But in addition to that, there was, as a result of that, I should say, there was a tremendous amount of investment in laying fiber optic cable. Because, oh my God, what are we going to do? There isn't going to be enough bandwidth to be able to handle all of this internet traffic if it continues to grow at the rate at which it's growing, which it did not. Well, what happened was they laid in all of this fiber optic cable, and several companies that I will not mention, that were huge high flyers with huge valuations. They're all gone. They're all out of business. Now, the fiber optic cable is still there, and we still benefited from it. But those companies are gone, and that investment money simply burned up and went up in smoke. Today, we're seeing exactly the same thing.
It's a bit like the railway bubble, though, isn't it? It's a bit, like there was a bubble in railways, but the railways ultimately, once the bubble was burst, the railways, underpinned in this country, it created a federal system, it created a superpower, ultimately helped create a superpower. So I think the techno-optimists would say, yes, there might be a bubble, yes, it might burst. There might be losers, as Jerry, you quite rightly point out, there might be many losers, but the systems in place are going to be so important, or going to usher in this new revolution, this new AI revolution, that it's worth fighting for. But the question is, there's another risk there, and it's nothing to do with valuations, Matt. It's that macro view of, does this even work? Do we have the energy infrastructure to build all of this out? Does the technology work well enough? And also, the kind of feedback that we're getting about the implementation of this technology within society, it shows that there are still some missteps happening. So it's not quite as glorious as people in Silicon Valley will necessarily have you believe.
Jerry, just briefly cast us back to the beginning of the noughties. I mean, there's so much talk now about how AI is the most fundamental revolution, since the Industrial Revolution. It'll do more to change our lives than anything since the invention of the steam engine, or maybe even, the printing machine or whatever, the printing press. I mean, is it fair to say that AI will expand our human capabilities more than the dot-com era did, or not?
Well, that's a very difficult question to answer. This is like asking, is the invention of the electric motor, what kind of economic effect does that have? And was that bigger than the invention of the electric bulb? Well, they were both very important, and obviously they changed society, they changed the way we live and the way we work. But I'd like to respond to something that was just said, if I may, because it's important to understand. There is not going to be a need for anywhere near the kind of capacity that's being built out in these data centers for a very long time. And if you were going to invest, nobody ever made money betting that computing was going to be more expensive in the future. That's always been a non-starter. So you're investing here in these NVIDIA chips that are very high priced right now. And when you look at that and think about what are they going to be worth in 3 years? The lifetime of those chips is maybe 3 years. Now you go buy 10 billion of those and you stuff them into some kind of giant warehouse out in the middle of some remote desert. And what do you think that's going to be worth in 3 years? And is this going to pay back in that kind of time frame? The answer is obviously not. So it's very clear to me that we're in a bubble, and that whole thing has to collapse. We're going to wind up with a new kind of ecological hazard. We're going to have these enormous acres and acres of data centers out in the middle of nowhere, and with the lights out, and it isn't even worth the electricity to keep them running. And they're going to be rusting away, and they're full of all kinds of toxic materials.
There could be bowling alleys or indoor golf or whatever. Think of it like that.
There aren't many people out there. Maybe the coyotes will.
I just want to. Okay, so there's obviously some people, as you say, are going to lose a ton of money. What about ordinary consumers? Either people who've got money invested in the stock market, people who've got money in savings, or jobs for that matter.
Those are different kinds of questions. Let me start with that. Let me tell you what my experience was. I can only speak to my own experience, really. I'm not an economist. Talk about all the specifics of the numbers. That's what they do at the IMF. That's their job. But let me tell you what my experience was. The dot-com bubble burst when something very simple happened. when the retail investors, the mom and pop investors, were no longer willing to eat any more of the risk that the major private investors and venture capitalists could shove down their throats through the investment banking process. I watched while the investment banks kept putting out more and more risky product to their customers, to their retail customers. And eventually there was so much money to be made by the bankers that everybody got involved. When the retail investors are no longer willing to be at the end of this chain of people passing off the investment to one another, that's when the whole thing bursts. And who gets stuck for the bill? The answer is the mom and pops, the 401ks, the people who put their money in the stock market and their faith in those people on TV, on those TV shows who are pumping up all these .com companies. And those are the ones who wound up holding the bag when the whole thing deflated. Before that, all the other people in the chain still have an incentive to keep pumping up the valuations and passing the investments along.
And presumably, Helia, that is exactly what the IMF is worried about.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's an interesting dynamic as well when you look at the US economy. 40% of US economic growth at the moment is entirely AI. So it's doing something that's quite political too. It's really giving the White House a huge boost, not just because of what's happening in the stock market with these record high valuations. And here there's a real connection between the tenant in the White House and what's happening on Wall Street. There is a real, if that's happening, if that's going well, then I'm doing my job well. But it's also boosting the US economy. If you take out AI from the US economy at the moment and look at business investment, then it's actually a downward trend, which means all of the other Trump economic policies, including, for example, tariffs, are somehow being shielded by this huge capital investment. Jerry was talking about all these warehouses, AI warehouses. I think that they're thinking about $3-4 trillion worth of investment into these endless warehouses. And as Jerry rightly says, there's a whole debate about whether those chips will be obsolete. So I think, yes, it has an impact on both lifting, yes, there's a risk, but it also has a political benefit of lifting the US country and economy at the moment, which has a very political impact on policy.
And Jerry, Donald Trump, has fallen in love with the AI. He's had all the AI bros over in the White House for lunch, breakfast, and dinner, and all the rest of it. What can he do to make sure, if anything at all, that this bubble doesn't burst?
What can he do to make sure that this bubble doesn't burst? I don't think he has any control over this whatsoever.
Are there federal funds that he can unleash that would make a difference, or would that just make it worse?
Well, the problem is that's a forward-looking thing, which is, let's just say, not in his wheelhouse. What he's concerned about is what's happening today and what he can get away with today. And he's not really worried about tomorrow. Now, I got to say, that has worked for this man for a very long time, which is a rather disturbing prospect, I'm sorry to say. But what's being covered up by this massive investment is a very interesting fact, which is when all that money's going into something which is very unlikely to have an economic return in a time frame that's relevant to investors, that money is not going into other valuable investments that could be made. Money's being pulled from clean energy projects and electric vehicles and, for God's sake, health research. This is covering up the fact that we're giving up this is your and my health we're talking about. It's going to suffer because we're not doing research and vaccines and other important things that have been fundamental to improving the health welfare of Americans. Investing for the future is not what this current US government is about. It's about exploiting what we've got right now to get as much as you can for a very small group of very wealthy people.
And of course, AI has been sort of covered in this halo of of being awestruck, and people think it's going to replace human brains, et cetera, et cetera. But actually, increasingly, we're getting reports, aren't we, Helia, of AI getting stuff wrong, of just not being particularly good. I wonder if that is the thing, a kind of collective realization that AI is not quite what it's cracked up to be, that might eventually burst the bubble.
I think there's one discussion, very excited discussion happening in San Francisco and in Silicon Valley about the frontier of this technology, about artificial general intelligence. How fast can this kind of agentic revolution go, and then how fast can we get to artificial general intelligence where it has consciousness, where it has kind of superhuman, it becomes its own god. And then there's the kind of more pragmatic argument about how is the real economy able to utilize this technology, and what is the application of that technology, because sometimes technology can race ahead of how companies on the ground can use them. And some of the survey results by leading universities suggest that at the moment AI is still failing.
Now you're in my wheelhouse on this kind of thing. Artificial intelligence is a fabulous innovation, and it's going to be a tremendous advantage in automation. But it is not what you see on TV. It's not what you see in the movies. It's got very specific limitations, which are quite real, and they're fundamental to the current wave of technology. We don't have time to get into this in a lot of detail, but let me just say this at a very high level. These systems are very good at certain kinds of prediction, short-term prediction of new words and pictures and things like that. But there's a myth that they can reason and that they think. And the truth is that these systems cannot reason and cannot think at all. They are not logically based. They give you the most plausible answer, not the most accurate answer. And that's a very important distinction. Now, people are going to get wind of this when they start to really work with it and go, well, why could it make a mistake that seems that stupid? Well, that was the most plausible answer to give you. It wasn't the right answer to give you. Now, that doesn't mean the technology is bad. It just means, like every technology before it, it has certain strengths and certain weaknesses. And I will tell you, since I live here in the Silicon Valley, most of the people working in this field, even right here in the Silicon Valley, do not understand the fundamental limitations of this new wave of technology. This other thing that's worth saying is every time there's an advance like this, it takes 5, 10, 15, 20 years for businesses to figure out how to make productive use of this new technology, how to reorganize their processes to make it, to get value out of it. So that's why you're seeing people going, well, I don't see it's not helping me in my business right now. There's a process that we need to go through, and it's going to take 10 to 20 years for that to work out.
So basically, Jerry, are you saying that if it's overvalued, it's because it's overhyped?
Sure, I'll give you a yes to that. It's overvalued because it's overhyped. This is not suddenly going to break through some artificial general intelligence, AGI ceiling, and now it can do anything and everybody will be out of work. That's not going to be the case. I would give people a little bit of comfort about this bubble, though, in terms of the employment picture, which is this. Every advance in automation has had exactly the same effects. Short term, it puts some people out of work. It makes us wealthier, and that wealth creates new kinds of jobs. And so what it really does in the end is it changes the nature of work, how we will do our jobs and what jobs we will get paid to do. Those are the things that are going to be shifting in the future. Here's my point of comfort. If you've been around if you're over the age of 30 or so, you'll remember the internet bubble. Well, the same thing was said about the internet, and it was true. All kinds of professions, including yours, I might point out, was devastated by the internet. Now, does that mean everybody's out of work? Of course not. Here we are at full employment. But the nature of what we do is very different today than what we did in 1995. And that's what's going to change.
But just looking at unemployment numbers, who's more likely to lose their job first? A computer programmer working for the AI industry that's overheated, or someone like you and me doing a white-collar job in a studio?
Well, the answer is the computer programmer, because the nature of programming is in the process of changing. Now, I have to tell you how surprising this is to me. I've been telling people for years, I mean, everybody's parents say to me, hey, what should my kids study in school? I say, well, if you want to always be sure they have a job, go get a degree in computer science. Well, now for the first time at Stanford University, one of the top universities, the graduates that were so sure they were going to get out and get that big ticket job, they're not getting job offers. Well, the nature of programming is changing, which is a fascinating story. But the people who are involved in face-to-face interactions, who are in professions where the authentic expression of human emotions such as empathy or concern are very important. They're fundamental to the success of you and your job. Those are the people who are not going to have a problem, because you really can't get that out of a computer. Computers are never going to substitute for that. And I don't think that they need to worry about it. The skills that are going to be important in the future are your ability to think clearly, to express yourself clearly, and to properly apply new kinds of ideas.
Going back to your central premise of is this a bubble and is it about to burst? One of the things that doesn't help that, and one of the anxieties that I'm picking up here in Washington and around with bankers, is this circular financing that's been happening with all of these companies. This is when, NVIDIA is investing $100 billion into OpenAI. So you're investing in the company who's buying your chips, who's your customer, who's then pumping the share price higher. And it's this circular motion that makes people wonder about, hang on, is some of the froth that we're seeing all about these same companies going in a cycle and just investing and reinvesting and pumping and again getting that excitement, the market excitement? And I think we haven't touched on this, but Jerry was talking about all the investment that has come out of other fields, drug discovery or green technology, and is all being pummeled into AI at the moment. And it's that fear of missing out by investors. The amount of money that is going into some of these deals to build out this infrastructure for chips that may or may not be obsolete, to build this new AI revolution is reflective of how people get in bubbles, which is, oh my God, there's so much money being made and I'm looking at the share price and I don't want to miss out. And that kind of all these companies, OpenAI and Oracle and Microsoft and NVIDIA and AMD and all the deals that we've seen in the past few months, I think make people feel even more nervous that it's the same players at the top that are feeding this frenzy.
Okay, and I guess like all bubbles, and like so much of the economy, it's about greed and it's about fear and when to call time on one or the other, whether it's fear of missing out or you're just too greedy and you're putting your money where you shouldn't be putting it. So finally, to wrap it up, Jerry, when is this crash that you've predicted very confidently on this podcast going to happen? And if anything can be done to stop it, what would that be, other than people suddenly drinking lots of green tea and being very reasonable?
Well, look, this is, of course, the question that every interview like this always ends up with. When's it going to happen? Well, I was around in 1999.
You're a futurist. You should know the answer.
Okay, well, the answer is tomorrow. I'm old. I'll be gone before I have to answer for what I had to say. So, let me be careful about this. I think the honest answer is when the retail investors, when there's nobody at the end of the line who's going to pick up the investment at a markup from the people who hold it now, that's when the whole thing will collapse. And unfortunately, that's usually when it comes down to the retail investors. So that's when I would what I'd really look out for, is when there's all of a sudden there's a way for mom and pop in Topeka, Kansas, to be able to invest in AI, some kind of AI fund or whatever it is. That's when I think we're gonna really see the end of this bubble, and that's not going to be a pretty process. And the answer to your other question, what are we going to do about it? You got to pop it now. You got to pop it now. The sooner you take the pain, the sooner people wake up and understand that this is overinvestment in the area. That the fact that these companies are investing in each other is a big problem. Because if there was real demand for their product, why would they have to put their money at work propping up their customers? That's the real question that people have to ask. I saw exactly this happen, and it's everybody passing the money back and forth with each other. And if you just look at one little slice of that, it looks like it's up, up, up until it's down, down, down.
Right. Helia, you're with the custodians of the world economy. They don't want to see anything go pop. What they might want to see is sort of gradual deflation of the balloon, right? Is it possible to deflate a balloon like the AI one gradually, carefully, without too much collateral damage, by saying the right things, the right words coming out of the right mouths?
I think there's no bubble in history, economic bubble, that has slowly deflated. I think that just doesn't exist, Matt. The truth is that it's the momentum, and to the point about fear of missing out, people can still make a lot of money on AI trades today, even though everyone is discussing this bubble imminently bursting, and therefore there could be still some considerable time to go before you see this burst. And by the way, there's an average of, about 6 to 9 months before bubbles burst, even when you call it, even in the credit crunch. That came so close to when there was a credit peak, actually. People think the history books seem to write it as, one day everything's great and then the next day it all goes to toast. That's not true in reality. The truth is that everyone keeps talking about the risks and the possibilities, but as you have seen in recent weeks and recent months, they keep piling in and buying.
What are you doing? Are you piling out into cash? Are you being careful?
I do not even try to market time. As you probably know, I was tempted. I went to my financial person. I said, hey, you know what? We got to get out of this before the party's over. Let's stop drinking and go home and, go into cash. And they reminded me, and they were right. You can't tell when it's going to burst, and you don't know. The best long-term strategy is very simple. I just hold on. I hold on. I've been through this 4 times. Each time I just held on, and it gets ugly. It rains for a while, and then the sun comes back out, and everything's fine.
Very wise advice, Jerry Kaplan. I hope you're right. I hope your financial guy is right. I wish you all the best. Let's hope the bubble doesn't burst in the next few days. That's it for this episode of the Forecast. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, goodbye.